Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This incident blew up in September 2023, right as we were adjusting to the post-pandemic workplace. It would probably be recognizable to people I work with. Hopefully they don't read this thread. It's a story about someone whose ambition was bigger than their ethics and the law, and it coming back to bite them. It's a bit long, but I promise it's worth the read. At the time, I was working as a manager in a mid-sized tech startup. While I was there, I was assigned a new member to my team. I'll call her Vanessa. Vanessa was in her late 20s and had just finished her MBA. She was the kind of person who could talk your ear off about all of her ideas and plans and what she was working on, but never really seemed to have anything to show for it. One day, after yet another client complaint, I called her into my office. "Vanessa, we need to talk about your communication with clients," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She immediately launched into her usual spiel. "Oh, you know how difficult client X can be. I've been swamped with the new project, and I'm pretty sure I sent them an email last week. It must have gotten lost in their spam folder or something." I sighed. "Vanessa, this isn't just about client X. We've had similar issues with 3 other accounts this month alone." "Well, you know how it is with the new hybrid work model. Sometimes things fall through the cracks," she replied, waving her hand dismissively. It got to the point where after one of our monthly meetings, I called her in again and explained that if she couldn't get her tasks done, she needed to let us know so we could help delegate resources to make sure things weren't slipping through the cracks. I'll admit, I was pretty direct. Her performance was impacting the whole team, and my job was literally to keep the team on track. "Look, Vanessa," I said, leaning forward in my chair, "I get that people can be under pressure, that there can be stuff going on at home which impacts work, and that sometimes people need a bit of help. But if every time I ask about a project you say, yep, everything's good, I've got it under control, and then it all falls apart and your only response is to blame the client, we have a problem." I explained that I wasn't going to start formal performance management or anything like that, but from now on I'd like her to check in with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to go over objectives for the week and to check if she needed support with any of her clients. I know it isn't fun to be micromanaged, so I tried to keep these check-ins short and mostly just offer assistance on stuff. She clearly hated my guts, though, and apparently was hatching her own revenge plan. Now, part of my role included use of a company credit card, which wasn't in my name, but I had access to. I was given the card to basically make small purchases for the office or spend up to $750 on client entertainment. The card was kept in an office I shared with another team manager, Jake, where we both could access it when we needed it. One day I got a call from accounts asking about a few abnormal purchases on the card, a Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, a couple of DoorDash orders, a Netflix subscription, etc. I said I didn't know anything about them and they should check with Jake. Apparently Jake didn't know anything about them either, because after the weekend I got called into the CEO's office. After Jake and I had denied involvement, accounts had started calling Adobe and DoorDash to find out where the transactions were coming from. They said that not only were the accounts in my name, they were registered to an email address with my name in it too, e.g. john.smith99@gmail.com or something. I can't describe what it felt like to be in that meeting. I felt physically sick. I couldn't work out what was happening. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was about to get fired and I couldn't understand how that was even possible. The CEO, Sarah, was going on about how access to the card was a privilege and that I had signed an agreement about appropriate use and so on and so forth. "John, I'm really disappointed," Sarah said, her voice stern. "You've been with us for years. I never expected this from you." I denied that I had been using it inappropriately, and Sarah listened, but I could tell she wasn't that convinced. To be honest, in my head, I was gaslighting myself and worrying that I had somehow saved the card in Google and maybe my wife had been accidentally using it or something. It was terrible, and I found myself apologizing and saying, "I don't know how this happened. I assure you that I know that none of those expenses are appropriate uses of company funds. There must have been some kind of mistake. Can I please have the details and look into it?" When I finally got out of that office, job still intact, barely, Vanessa was waiting for me at my office door. She was grinning from ear to ear and sweetly explained she had been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd do the meeting tomorrow, and she said, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" Confused, because I didn't know I was in a revenge story at the time, I just replied, "Yes, why would I not be in tomorrow?" She just sipped her coffee and said, "Oh, no reason," turned around and went back to her desk. Something felt off, but I was still worrying about what had happened with Sarah, so I spent the next couple of hours calling my wife, calling Adobe, and doing the same legwork that accounts had done. It became very obvious that someone had been using my name and the company card to spend a bunch of money online. Had I been hacked or something? Personal info on the dark web, and these hackers just really wanted Photoshop and Chipotle delivered? It was the DoorDash that was her undoing. After getting on the phone and talking through what had gone on, and obviously giving my name for the account and everything, the customer service rep told me where the food had been delivered. It was in our city, which made me rule out straight away any notion of my data being sold online or something. Now I was suspicious and pissed. I don't like to think the worst of people, but now I was. Listening to my gut, I pulled up Vanessa's employee information and checked her address. I pulled it up on Google Maps, dropped a pin on her place, and then looked for the address DoorDash had given me. It was the corner of her effing block. I was furious. When she left work for the day, I got IT to give me access to her laptop. Sure enough, when I opened up her Gmail account, under her listed accounts was john.smith99@gmail.com. There were some things she had been smart about. The IP address she had been using was the office, which would have tied back to me. She had even had the food delivered to a different address. She had even made a fake email address. But saving her passwords on a work computer was a mistake. I called Sarah that night and explained what I had found, and kept the IT guy with me to support the fact that I hadn't just logged into her computer and made it all up. The next day, Sarah called Vanessa into her office. I could hear raised voices through the door. "But I didn't do anything wrong," Vanessa protested. "Identity theft and fraud are very serious offenses, Vanessa." Sarah's voice was ice cold. "You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." When she teary-eyed left the office, I made sure I was standing in the hall sipping a cup of coffee. It had gotten cold while I waited for her, but still tasted sweet. "Tough day?" I asked innocently. She just glared at me and stomped off. I hope she went home that night, because if she did, she would have received some nice goodbye Chipotle delivered by DoorDash. Paid for on my personal card, of course. Revenge and justice can be the same thing, right? In the end, she was fired. Sarah apologized, and we were on good terms when I left in February for a new gig. Vanessa never apologized, and I haven't seen her since. Sarah decided not to get the police involved, and neither did I, just didn't want the hassle. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be sharing a story about a medical emergency, but here we are. It all started last week when my 6-year-old son, Tommy, came down with a nasty case of the flu. At first I thought it was just a cold. You know how kids are always catching something at school, but after a few days, his fever spiked and he was having trouble breathing. That's when I knew we had to get him to urgent care. It was a Saturday evening and the place was packed. I mean, there were people everywhere, coughing, sneezing, you name it. We signed in and found a couple of seats in the crowded waiting room. Tommy was burning up and clearly miserable, so I did my best to keep him comfortable while we waited. After about 30 minutes, this woman walks in. She looked to be in her mid-40s, dressed like she just came from a fancy dinner party or something. The moment she entered, you could feel the energy in the room shift. She marched up to the reception desk, completely ignoring the line of people waiting to check in. "Excuse me," she said in a voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I need to see a doctor immediately. It's an emergency." The receptionist, bless her heart, kept her cool. "Ma'am, you'll need to sign in and wait like everyone else. We're seeing patients in order of arrival and severity of condition." That's when this woman, let's call her Karen, lost it. "Do you have any idea who I am? I don't have time to wait. I demand to be seen right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, we were all sick or injured, that's why we were there, but this lady acted like she was the only one who mattered. The receptionist stood her ground. "I'm sorry, but that's not how it works. Please take a seat and we'll call you when it's your turn." Karen huffed and puffed, then turned to survey the waiting room. Her eyes landed on Tommy and me, and I knew we were in for trouble. She stormed over to us. "You," she said, pointing at me. "Your kid doesn't look that sick. Why don't you take him home so I can have your spot?" I was shocked. "Excuse me? My son has a high fever and is having trouble breathing. We're not going anywhere." Karen's face turned red. "Well, I have a migraine. That's much more serious than some sniffles. You should leave and come back another time." Now, I'm usually a pretty calm person, but when it comes to my kid, all bets are off. "Lady," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I don't know what your problem is, but you need to back off. We're all here because we need help, and you're not more important than anyone else." She gasped like I'd just insulted her entire family. How dare you speak to me like that? I'll have you know I'm friends with the owner of this clinic. One call from me and you'll be banned for life. I couldn't help but laugh. Go ahead and make that call. I'm sure the owner would love to hear how you're harassing sick children. Karen's eyes narrowed. She whipped out her phone and started furiously tapping away. I thought she was bluffing, but a few minutes later, a man in a white coat came out to the waiting room. Is there a problem here? He asked, looking between Karen and me. Karen jumped in before I could say anything. Yes, doctor. This woman and her child are taking up space that could be used for more urgent cases. I insist you ask them to leave immediately. The doctor turned to me with a questioning look. I explained Tommy's symptoms and how long we'd been waiting. He nodded sympathetically, then turned back to Karen. Ma'am, he said calmly, I understand you're in pain, but we have a triage system for a reason. A child with a high fever and respiratory issues takes priority over a migraine. I'm going to have to ask you to wait your turn or seek treatment elsewhere if you feel you can't wait. Karen's jaw dropped. Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this. The doctor didn't even flinch. Ma'am, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. In this clinic, medical need determines priority. Now you have two choices. Sit down and wait quietly or leave. If you continue to disrupt other patients, I'll have no choice but to call security. I couldn't believe it. This doctor was my new hero. Karen stood there sputtering for a moment, then let out a screech that made everyone in the waiting room jump. This is outrageous. I'm calling my lawyer right now. You'll all be sorry. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The entire waiting room let out a collective sigh of relief. The doctor turned to me and Tommy. I'm sorry about that, he said. Let's get your son looked at, shall we? As we followed him back to an exam room, I heard a smattering of applause from the other patients. It wasn't much, but it felt good to know we weren't alone in dealing with Karen's craziness. Tommy ended up being diagnosed with a severe case of flu and needed some breathing treatments. We were there for a few hours, but the staff was amazing. They even brought Tommy a popsicle when his fever started to come down. As we were leaving, I saw Karen's fancy car still in the parking lot. She was on the phone, gesticulating wildly. I couldn't help but smile a little. Sometimes karma works fast. The next day I got a call from the clinic. I was worried it might be about Karen's threats, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. The doctor who had stood up for us wanted to apologize again for the incident and make sure Tommy was doing okay. He also mentioned that they'd received several complaints about Karen's behavior and were banning her from the clinic. I was floored. It's not often you see entitled people face real consequences for their actions. The doctor explained that they take patient care and comfort very seriously, and Karen's behavior was completely unacceptable. In the end, Tommy recovered just fine. We even sent a thank you card to the clinic staff for their excellent care, both medical and in dealing with difficult patients. It's reassuring to know that there are still places where common decency and medical ethics win out over entitlement and bullying. As for Karen, I haven't seen her around town since then, but I like to imagine her sitting at home stewing over the fact that her tantrum not only didn't get her what she wanted, but actually got her banned from the clinic. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting karma do its thing. This whole experience taught me a valuable lesson. Stand your ground when you know you're right, especially when it comes to your kid's health. And remember, no matter how important someone claims to be, in a medical setting, the most critical condition always comes first, not the loudest voice or the fanciest clothes. The next one is a petty revenge story. So I work in an office, it's pretty busy, but my office door stays open most of the time, and I get lots of people walk by and interrupt my day, asking questions or just shooting the shit. I'm behind on my workload because of some unplanned delays. I mention this to my boss and say that I'm closing the door for a few hours to get stuff done without interruption. Enter Sally. Sally's reaction to a closed door is to knock and open it, a minor inconvenience. So she proceeds to do this to me a couple of times because her tasks are linked to the fires I've spent the morning fighting. Every time she does this, my train of thought gets derailed and I have to waste time getting back into my rhythm. She left the door ajar after finishing talking to me, so I got up and walked over to the door to close it. I turned the latch on the doorknob, meaning I'm now locked in my office. Sweet peace. Sure enough, a few minutes later, here comes Sally. Knock knock handle turns a lot less than she's used to, and she shoulders her way into the door. The thud of her impacting my door is quite satisfying. I'm sure she will have something to say later, but that can wait for another day. The next one is a malicious compliance story. For context, my brother is an inconsiderate douche canoe. It was a free day for me. I had a job with random scheduling, so it was either a weekday or a weekend. I'm chilling at home about to cook up something for dinner or late lunch when I get a phone call, 4:30 p.m. My brother called me and expected me to jump up and go pick him up from his job because none of the family were available on a busy weekend for them. When I say he expected, I mean he called me up and said the exact words, "You have to pick me up." This was before he had his own car and license, around 18. His job was on the other side of town, a full 30-40 min drive or more depending on traffic, and it was at 4:30 p.m. just before hectic work traffic at 5 p.m. If I had refused to get him, he would have called either of our parents and whined until I was idioted at to go pick him up. Understanding the box I had been put in, a Grinch-like smile grew across my face as I made up my mind. What did I do? I picked him up and then made 3 stops along the way home. 3 long stops. The first was at a gas station. I had been low on gas and he couldn't complain because I was his only ride. At the second stop, I pulled in at a restaurant to eat inside, Tijuana Flats. The whole time he is complaining that I should take it to go and that we were only 15 minutes from home. The whole time he's whining about me wasting time and that he had to do homework. That homework took like 10 minutes and then he just passed out with his TV and Xbox on. Eventually he even called Grandma to complain, so much so she called me to ask if I had offered to buy him any food while there. I did, then told him, tough. He wanted the ride, he got it. And finally, at stop 3, a supermarket 4 miles from home, I needed a few groceries. Around 6:15 p.m., 6:20 p.m., when we finally got home, he complained like an idiot to our parents, Grandma and Dad, but when my dad got home from work, he just laughed, gave me a high five, and was like, "Why didn't I ever think of that?" And I was like, "Hey, maybe next time, I'll come along so we can make a few extra stops." The next one is an entitled people story. This happened in 2006. Sorry, it's longer than I initially expected. I was working for a large construction company in Spain. We mainly focused on civil engineering and infrastructure projects, but we also handled significant architectural projects worldwide, especially in the Middle East. Whenever there was a bid for a big lucrative contract in the Arabian Peninsula, this company was there winning enough contracts to rank in the global top 100 in our field. There's a lot to be said about how they got to that point, but what matters to this story is that they were, and still are, big. At that time, I was working on the planning phase for a project in Dubai. My job involved everything that needed to be done before actually putting boots on the ground and starting to move massive amounts of dirt. I was supposed to move to Dubai for a few years for this project, but I ended up getting a job at a different company before that happened. Without giving too much detail, it was a multifaceted project with a significant infrastructure component and a minor architectural one attached to it. I worked in the architecture department. As often happens with contracts of this scale, different aspects of the project were subcontracted to smaller firms worldwide. Subcontractors were based in many places, ranging from Jakarta to the east coast of the USA. This will be relevant later. My main role was to gather every plan and file the subcontractors sent, register everything for our budgeting department, and ensure it followed the approved basic project, the style Bible, and the technical specs my company, the main contractor, worked with. After all, we were the ones who had to use them later on site. If anything significant needed to be changed, I would send back the files with a request for specific alterations. If the changes were small and quick, I would do them myself, but also send them back detailing the modifications made and the reasons, indexing, style, or technical, so the subcontractors could keep working on up-to-date plans. Of course, everything was done with my supervisor, the lead architect, on copy. Everything was fine. I enjoyed the job, and communication was smooth with all subcontractors. Then came the entitled firm. Apparently, the firm we hired to do the plans for the personnel residential buildings in this huge complex had been acquired by a bigger firm from Boston. Emails were not being answered for a month and we were starting to get worried, but then, out of the blue, came a long, rant-filled email with lots of attachments. Someone I will call Bob introduced himself as the new project manager. Okay, I guess he manages this project at that firm. Then he proceeded to explain everything he wanted to change in the project. He dismissed the basic project, the one approved by the client, proposed a more modern look and a new concept, and even sent a new set of technical specs for the plans, including everything from their own layout naming rules to the way every plan was indexed. Oh, and of course he demanded everything be expressed in imperial units. I had to read it twice to fully grasp what he wanted. From his email, I gathered Bob didn't understand that this wasn't merely a residential development. For example, he wanted to change the providers for most of the installations to ones far more reliable, translation, American, without realizing that the ones we chose were the ones that could deliver for all the different needs of the many buildings in the project. I tried to reply politely, explaining why some of his demands were not viable and why the rest would severely delay the project. I honestly thought the new firm had little experience with these kinds of projects and tried to be as understanding and thorough as I could so we could have them working in parallel with the rest of the subcontractors ASAP. After sending the email, my supervisor called me. Prepare for a fun reply. Why? Did I say something rude? You didn't catch the problem. He thinks they are the lead on this project. Right on the nail. The next day I got a furious email from Bob asking who the duck I thought I was, how they could find a new construction company in a second, and that hiring cheaper foreign companies always brings trouble in the long run. After consulting briefly with my supervisor, my reply was simply a JPG with the contractor diagram that figured in the project Bible, and a request for their latest plans to start making the changes so they could get up to date. He replied by sending those. No apologies. Oh well, at least that was it. Nope. For the next few months, Bob continued to be a rude, loud nuisance. He was obviously so excited at the idea of being the lead on a big international development that he resented being just a small part of an even bigger project. He wasn't ready to work with others, especially foreign others. Here are some examples. He complained about not understanding what other contractors wrote in the email chains. They all wrote in English, but the kind of international English one develops when working with people from many places. He wasn't ready to infer from context or ask for clarification. He complained. He even complained about an email that was perfectly fine. He didn't understand it because it was written by a British person. He complained about the time difference. We scheduled everything on Dubai time, but tried to accommodate the 11-hour time zone range between contractors. He kept complaining about calling the Madrid office and not finding me or the lead because he was calling at 9 p.m. He once told me my country wouldn't get out of the Middle Ages until we started working on American time. He repeatedly tried to bypass us and contact other contractors directly to order them to make changes to their part of the project, usually to avoid implementing changes ordered by the lead, again, us. Many UAE regulations were based on American regulations, but not all. He unilaterally changed things in the projects to adapt them to US code without asking or bothering to read the actual regulations of the UAE. Bob had opinions about any code that wasn't the one he knew, of course. At one point, he commented on the budget, not his area, but we were just talking, because everything was ultra expensive. Lots of marble, high-end domotics, insulation, etc. This was during the Dubai boom, and they spent money like crazy. Projects there were very luxury-oriented. He kept bringing that up, and then he said something along the lines of his taxes being wasted on that. Bob thought every country in the world was subsidized by the US, and there was no way they could afford that without American help. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.